Okay, hello and welcome to the BYC Collective. In this short tutorial series, I'm going to be showing you guys how to create a daily render, something like this. If this is your first time using Houdini, I'm going to be showing you how to go from a blank scene to creating some geometry, lighting it, rendering it, and producing something minimal, something simple, but I'm going to show you guys a few techniques on how to get some procedural texturing going and create some objects and basically just show you around. So without further ado, let's jump into Houdini here. Now, this is what Houdini is going to look like when you first open it. So the first thing that we need to do is create and set our project. So if you come up to the top and just go File, New Project, this little window is going to pop up. And where it says Project Path, just click this little icon. And I'm just going to navigate to where I'm going to save this. So inside of Projects BYC Houdini Tutorials, we are going to create a new folder called Houdini Everyday 01 and click Accept. So the thing that Houdini does, where it says $job will be set to, it says Projects BYC Houdini Tutorials Houdini Everyday 01, which is the folder that we just created, and now it's creating a new folder called New Project. So we don't want that. I'm just going to delete this and come up to the end of our directory, cut and paste. And now it says $job will be set to, it says Projects BYC Houdini Tutorials Houdini Everyday 01, and that's what we want. So up here where it says $job, I'll show you what that means just now. So these are all of the folders that are going to be created inside of our project path here. And what I usually like to do is just enable custom one, type img. This is where I render my single images to. And then when I render animation, that will be rendered to the render directory. So we're all happy with this. Click Accept. Now, we've created the project folder, but we still need to save our project. So if you go up to the top and go File, Save As, to the left here it says $job. Now, $job is the working directory that you are currently working in inside of Houdini. So whatever you set your project to, that's where $job is going to be. So if we just go over to the right here, you'll see that inside of Houdini Tutorials, we've created a folder called Houdini Everyday 01. And if I click on this, here are all of the folders, including the img folder that I just created. So jumping back to Houdini, let's just go into Scripts. And then just call this Houdini Everyday 01 version 001 and click Accept. Cool. So we have successfully saved our project. You'll see up at the top here, it tells us where our project is. Now, before we start creating objects, let's just take a moment to look around. Up at the top, we have our shelves. To the left, these are shelves more to do with modeling, rigging, animation, and then to the right we have some cameras and lights, as well as more simulation-based shelves, so like particles, rigid bodies, oceans, fluids, some cool stuff in there. Then just below that we've got this little tab here where we are inside of our scene view. There's the animation editor, render view, composite view, motion effects view. We're just going to stay in the scene view for now. Just underneath that, to the left, we've got a little toolbar here, which is mainly for snapping, transform controls, and then selection controls up here. To the right, we have more kind of UI-based tools, so we will be able to select points, normals, we'll just view them, lighting, and whenever you're moving around in a camera, you want to click this little lock button. So we will get into that just now. Up at the top here, it says parameters. This is basically where all of the parameters will show up once we start selecting things. And then just underneath, we have our objects panel. This is where we are going to be creating everything. So just below that, we have our timeline, and then a bunch of timeline options, and we'll get into that when we start doing a little bit of simulation. I'll show you guys. Cool. So just in the viewport, if you hold down Alt and then click your mouse, you'll be able to pan around. If you hold down the right mouse button, you'll be able to zoom in and out, and then left mouse button is, oh wait, middle mouse button, sorry, is like translating and moving around like this. So when we first start getting into things, what we need to do is create some geometry. So first off, what I'm going to do is inside of our objects pane, we're just going to hit tab and then type box. And we are going to throw down this box. So now it says geometry and box 1. Before we go any further, I just want to make things a little easier to see here. It's a really small space that we have. So if you just move your mouse over to the left and click and drag our scene view over to the side, something like that. And then what I'm going to do is there's a little arrow over here, and when I hover over it and click, it gets rid of our parameters. It's still there. I can click it again and it will come back. But for, well, what I like to do is just hide it like that and then hit P when you are inside of your objects pane, and that shows the properties panel. So now we just have a little bit more space. So we have this box. What we're going to do is create a backdrop. I'll show you guys how to make like an infinite backdrop. But just to familiarize you guys with like the contexts of Houdini and how they work, is that we have this geometry. It's called box 1. If I just click and hit tab and type down geometry, this is essentially the same thing, except inside of this geometry node, there is a box. So these are essentially folders. This is where we are going to be creating and storing objects. So if I highlight box 1 and I either double click or hit enter, it will jump inside and you'll see that there's a box inside. And you'll notice that we just moved down. So from the object level, we are now inside of box 1. And you can go further. I'll show you just now. But this essentially is the structure that Houdini works in. And if I just click where it says object here, there's other networks called CH, which are chops, IMG, mat for materials, OBJ for objects, and then out. This is where we are going to be rendering from, where all of our render operators go. And then there's shop, which I don't use, and I don't use IMG as well. But yeah, CH is chops. This is where you kind of get audio-driven animation, and you can link up sounds to drive a whole bunch of cool things. So yeah, it's very cool. I've only just gotten into it. Anyway, okay, so now that we have this box, before we get going, now that we have changed our desktop, what I'm going to do is just come up to the top, hit desktop, and say save current desktop as, and then I'm just going to say my desktop, hit save. So now it's saved. And then what I'm going to do is come up to the top where it says Houdini, go to preferences, and where it says startup and desktop, I'm going to select my desktop and then hit accept. So every time that we start up Houdini, it's going to default to this view, which is just my preferred view. Cool. So now we have this box. We're just going to hit enter, double click to dive inside. And you'll notice that it's a polygon. We can change it to polygon mesh, which gives us just a mesh, and we can change the divisions if we need, like that. For now, we're just going to keep it on polygon. And then what we are going to do, where it says size here, where it's X, Y, and Z, and what we're going to do is just right-click in the Y, click copy parameter, and then in the center, where it says Y as well, we're going to right-click and say paste relative references. So now you'll see that our box has moved up because it's saying that the center is now the same as the size, which is 1. And we don't want that. We want it to sit on the grid here. So what we're just going to do is say divided by 2. And now no matter how big the box gets, it's always going to scale from the bottom and always stay on the ground plane. And I'm just hitting middle mouse button on the scale over here, the size, and then it gives us the options to kind of go in increments. And if you just highlight the one and then move your mouse left or right, it will increase or decrease. Cool. So we have this box, it's sitting on the grid, it's sitting on the origin. Now, if we go down to the bottom here, we'll see that there is Z, Y, and X. So currently we are looking from the front, there is X, Y, and then if we look to the side, there is Z. To change the viewport, what we're going to do is just hit spacebar 2. Now we're in the top view. Spacebar 3, we're now in the front view. Spacebar 4, we're now in the right view. And then spacebar 5 is the UV view, but we're going to forget all about that. And then if we hit spacebar 1, we go back to perspective view. So we're going to use that quite a lot when we're setting up our scene. It just makes things pretty easy if you can just shuffle through left, right, top, and perspective. Cool. So what we're going to do is we are going to just move over to the right. Actually, we can hit spacebar 4 and we go over to the right. We'll notice that our Z-axis is pointing this way. So what we want to do is hit S, and that pops us into the selection mode. And what we want are faces, or primitives, which is what we have here. You can hit 2, 3, 4, or 5 to switch between these. So I can go 2 points, 3 edges, 4 is primitives of faces, 5 is points or vertexes, I guess. But we want faces, so I'm just going to select this edge of the box. Hit spacebar 1 to just jump back into perspective view, and you'll see that we only have 2 sides that are not selected. And then what I'm going to do is just hit delete, and it throws down a blast node for us. And that's essentially just what a delete is. So we can go delete non-selected, and it inverts the selection for us. It inverts the selection for us, but we don't want that, so I'm just going to keep that unchecked. But it is kind of handy sometimes just to delete non-selected. So now we have this basically wall and floor. And what I'm going to do is hit S again, and then hit 3 to go to edges. I'm going to select this edge, and then what I'm going to do in the viewport with my mouse still in the viewport, just hit tab and type in Bevel. And you'll see poly bevel come up, hit enter. And now we can bevel this edge. And you'll notice that it's just one edge at the moment. You can increase the divisions, but what we want is to set this to round. And if we up the divisions, sometimes I go quite hectic with this, 20, something like that. Let's leave it there for now. And now we have this backdrop. And you'll notice that the outside is a brighter color than the inside here. And I believe that that is because our normals are pointing the wrong way. This is where we can see our normals. So if we just click that, we should be able to see some normals. And they are indeed pointing outward. So what we're going to do is just click in the objects pane here, hit tab, type down reverse, and hit the display flag, and you'll see our normals are now pointing the way that we want it to. And you'll notice the little blue button on the side here. This is the display flag. So depending on what I want to look at, I just hit the display flag there, and that's essentially what we're looking at. So I'm just going to turn off normals. There's also point normals here. We don't have any points at the moment. Or there we go. Yeah, normals, point normals, point trails. Okay, normals. Those are our normals. What is this? Primitive normals. Yeah, we're all good. And then points. Cool, so I'm just going to uncheck that so that we're not seeing any of those displays. And then just for good measure, if you're wondering, how to get normals, not every, the objects that you make don't come with UVs and they don't come with normals. You'll see up at the top, if you middle mouse click on here, we just have one attribute, which is a point attribute, P for position there. If we come down to the bottom, you'll see that we still just have P, even though that we have reversed the normals. So just for good measure, to use later down in the line, if you just hit tab and type normal, and throw it down and connect it, hit the display flag, and now if you middle mouse click on here, you'll see that we have one vertex attribute, and that is N for normal. So now we pretty much have procedural control over our backdrop, and I have actually turned this into an HDA, or an asset, that I have basically created an object just like this and promoted some attributes, and now whenever I start, I just save this into my assets, and I can just hit tab, go to BYC backdrop, throw this down, and this is the preset backdrop that I have made myself. We'll scale our one up now, but you'll see here I've promoted some attributes, and we can change the scale and all that good stuff. So if you want me to show you how to do that, I will probably show you guys and do another tutorial on that. So I will just delete that, show our little backdrop over here. What we can also do is if you're really far away from your object, or just in the scene, or you have selected an object, if you hit spacebar and F, it will just quickly snap you to that view. You can also do spacebar G, but I believe spacebar G is the whole scene. So if we had other objects, if they were bigger, we would see the whole scene. And then I think spacebar H just brings you back home. It does the same thing. So hit spacebar F, G, or H, and you should be good. Cool, so let's just click here and rename this and call this backdrop. And let's jump inside again, and now we can actually, instead of changing the size of this box here, just for cleanliness sake, what we're going to do is just hit tab, start typing transform, and throw down a transform node and add it in the middle here. So if we hit our display flag here and then select our transform, because it's also scaling from the origin, we can do something like this, say 10, and now we have a nice big backdrop. You'll notice our bevel gets smaller. That's because of the relative size of our box now. So if we just pump this up, let's say like 3, now we get a nice curve. Cool, so now what we need is some objects. So let's just jump up to the top here. Let's hide our backdrop for now. And I'm just going to hit tab and type sphere. And throw down this sphere. Cool, so what we're going to do is just jump inside. And you'll notice that it's set to primitive. And now what this is actually doing is, if I middle mouse click on here, you'll see we just have 1 point, 1 primitive, 1 vertice, 1 sphere. It's essentially creating the sphere through a mathematical equation, and what we really want are some polygons. So up at the top, instead of primitive, we're just going to say polygon. Now we have a triangulated mesh. We can up the frequency here to say about 10 to get a smoother looking mesh. And if we don't want a triangulated mesh, we can go to polygon mesh, which gives us quads. And again, we'll change this to something like 50 and 100. So for right now, we're just going to use a polygon. And now what we're going to do, the same as we did with our box, we are going to right-click on our y-axis for the radius here, say copy parameter, where it says center, just click paste relative references. Right-click and say paste relative references. Cool. So yeah, you'll notice that we didn't have to change the expression, so we can just leave it as is, and whatever the radius is or becomes, it now scales from the ground plane, which is handy. But usually when we are creating like modeling, I'll usually leave everything at the origin so everything has symmetry, and it makes modeling a little bit easier. So cool, so we have this sphere. If we just come back up to the top and enable our backdrop, you'll notice that the sphere is pretty big. Houdini uses meters instead of centimeters like other 3D applications. So if you want centimeters, right now the radius is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. And that means if you want centimeters, you know, say you want a 10 centimeter sphere, you would just say 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. But for now, we're going to keep it at 1 because it makes texturing easier. And what we now need to do is just jump back up to the object level, jump back inside of our backdrop, and then where we have our transform, let's just make it 50. Cool. So now we have a sphere and we have a backdrop. Let's just go up to the top and click File, Save. So we have a sphere and we have a backdrop. Let's just create a few more interesting shapes that we are going to use. So if I just hit Tab, type Geometry, so that we are going to grab an empty geometry node, jump inside and hit Tab, type Platonic Solid. So you'll notice that everything is still in a gray wireframe. If you don't want to see that, just up at the top here, if you click, you can either say Show All Objects. That's not what we want. We want to say Hide Other Objects. So now we are just dealing with this object here. And this Platonic Solid is basically just a bunch of different icosahedrons and cubes, different shapes. Some basic shapes, icosahedron, dodecahedron, some cool things. So I think for this tutorial, we are just going to take this dodecahedron. Let me check icosahedron, which one's cooler? Let's go with the dodecahedron. I think it's going to work better. Okay. For the sake of this tutorial, we are going to copy this Platonic Solid into our sphere over here. And I'm just going to hit paste. Now we have our Platonic and our sphere together. Okay. So what we might, or definitely going to be doing is transforming this Platonic Solid. So let's type down transform. And we are probably going to need one for our sphere as well. So what I did there was just hold down Alt. If you hold down Alt and then click and drag a node, it will duplicate it. It saves a bunch of time, super handy. So now we have these two transforms here, and what we are most likely going to be doing a lot is merging them together. So if we hit Tab and type Merge, we'll get this merge node, and now if we connect both inputs, you'll see that we now have our objects merged. And sorry, that duplicated. So if you hit the display flag, you'll see that we just see our sphere, or we just see our Platonic. And now if we hit the merge button, we can see both. So what we're going to do is just transform our sphere upwards a little bit. Let's say 1.25. Let's also just scale it down a little bit. Cool. And then for our dodeca over here, what I'm going to do is hit spacebar and 3. Now we are in our front view, and essentially I want to try and flip this so that it's straight. See if this works. Spacebar 1 to go back. Looks like we need to translate it. If you right click on the pivot over here and go to pivot mode, this is how you move the pivot around without actually moving the object. So it's a good place to show you snapping. So if I hit the snap to point over here, I can click the pivot, and whichever point I get close to, it's going to start snapping it. Likewise with the grid, I can snap this to the grid. This gets handy when you are in the front or side views or top views. And then there's also to curve, but I'm just going to undo all of that, because what I really wanted to show you was if you right click and you go align handle, I'm going to say object. Let's see if the axis allows. Okay. Align handle, say world. Okay, it's not working, so I'm going to go pivot mode. Yeah, I'm still in pivot mode. So I'm just going to move this, or rotate it around. And that looks straight enough. So let's just right click, click on pivot mode to come out of pivot mode. And now I'm going to rotate this because I want to try and get a flat surface. Spacebar 3 to jump back to our front. Oh, nice. Okay. I think we're pretty good. Spacebar 1 to jump back to the perspective view. So now if we just go to Ghost Other Objects, we essentially have a backdrop over here with a sphere on top. And then we have a nice platonic solid here, which we are essentially going to turn into like a tabletop type deal. So just to make it a little bit more interesting, we are going to give these edges. We're going to put a wire around it so that we can shade it differently. And to do that, let's just go back to our Platonic here. I'm going to go up to the top and just say hide other objects for now. Cool. So with this Platonic solid, what we're going to do is just click in the object pane here, click tab, type down polywire, and hook that up to our Platonic, and let's see what happens. Cool. So now essentially what it's done is it's taken the edges and basically looked at it as if it was a curve and created a wire around it. So if I just bring our radius down to like 0.25, let's go 0.02. And then where it says divisions, let's bump this up to say 12. Just for now. We might want to change that later. Where it says segments, let's maybe give it 2. Ooh. Let's just keep it at 1 for now. Let's take it down to 0.1. And then what we're going to do is, with this polywire, we are just going to merge it back down here. Merge these two together. So now we have that, and then at the bottom we are going to click and connect that there. So now our tabletop has got this nice wire around it. So it's giving us a warning. So let's check what that warning is. Mismatch of attributes, i.e. UV. We don't need UVs for now. So just to get rid of that message, I'm just going to say hit tab, type at delete, and it says attribute delete. Let's just plug it in here because I'm pretty sure that's where it's coming from. And where it says primitive attributes, we're just going to type UV. Not there. Let's maybe put one here too. Maybe they are point attributes. So you can select both nodes if they're the same. And then if you change one, it will update the other. So let's try point. What does it say? Vertex. Okay, silly me. So over here it says vertex attribute. So let's cut this and paste it in the vertex attribute. And you'll see that our warning went away. Let's plug one in here because I'm pretty sure it's the same error. And view that. Now we have no errors. So basically when we changed some stuff and dropped down the polywire, it created some UVs for us, and we do not want UVs right now. So I just deleted them. Cool. So you might notice that we are using a lot of merges, and we are going to be using a lot of transforms. So I like shortcuts. So what we are going to do is we are going to create a shelf so that we can add a transform and a merge, and then we are going to generate a hotkey. So just up at the top here where this little button is, just click the plus and say new shelf. And we're just going to call this my shelf and my shelf. Hit apply and accept. And now you'll notice that we have my shelf over here. So if I take transform 1 and just click and drag it up to my shelf, you'll see it says transform 1. And then I'm going to take merge 1 and click and drag it up to the shelf here. So now we have transform and merge. So now I want to generate a hotkey. So if I just right click on the shelf tool here and just go to edit tool, what we are going to do where it says hotkeys and where it says network pane, we're just going to say edit. We are going to click this little button. We're going to say T for transform, and we get a warning. It says assign to transform in Houdini Pane's network editor. I think that's because I've already set up the hotkey, but most of the keys that you try will already be used for something. So chances are you won't really use that hotkey, and you can always set it back if you need to. So I'm just going to say remove other. And now for our transform 1, we have now told it whenever I hit T inside of the network editor over here, it will give me a transform. So I'm going to hit apply and accept. That did not initialize. Yeah, accept. Oh, and then apply. You'll see that we have T here, and then hit accept. So now inside of our geometry node, and the mouse, I believe, has to be inside of the pane over here, and you hit just hit T. Now you'll see that we have this node connected to our mouse, and if I throw it down, it's another transform, which is super handy. So we'll do the same for our merge here. If you right click, say edit tool, hotkeys, hit edit, click over here, type M for merge, just say remove other, hit apply, accept, apply, you'll see it says M, hit accept. And now whenever I hit M, it's going to give me a merge node. So if you find yourself using a lot of the same node over and over again, I suggest you just create a new shelf and assign it some hotkeys. And it's the only way that I believe you can assign hotkeys, or the easiest way to assign hotkeys to nodes to make your life a little easier. So I'm just going to get rid of that merge. Go back to our object here. Cool. What we're going to do now is we are going to just jump back up to object level. What's going on there? Something has happened over here. let's just go into our sphere. Oh, it's our other. Let's get rid of this Platonic solid. Now what we're going to do is let's hide everything. And let's throw down a tube. So here we have this tube, and if we jump inside, you'll see our tube over here. And notice that it kind of looks like the sphere that we just had, because it's a primitive. There is only one point, one primitive, one everything. So if we change that to polygon, we now have 24 points, 12 primitives, 48 vertices, and 12 polygons. And what I'm going to do is just go to the y-axis, say Z. So now if we are looking at it face on, we should just see the curve. So if I hit spacebar 3, if I enable the points here, you'll see that we have our tube. If we go to the top view, or the right, you can still see it there. Front and top view. Cool. So what we want is a nice round, tube. So let's bump this up to say 48. Let's go to 60. And if I just jump into front view, what we're going to do is just hit T to throw down a transform now. Much easier. Okay, well, it was saved with a rotation on it, so we do not want that. What's going on here? And the pivot was changed. Okay. So I'm just going to fix that. So let's delete and delete. Just going to go transform. So now it's blank, so it won't do that. I'm just going to come up to the top here. Let's throw down a merge. And drag that up here. Oh, we didn't need to. But, okay. Edit tool. T. Apply accept. Apply accept. Merge. Edit tool. M. Apply accept. Great. So now if we hit T and we throw down a transform, it doesn't have any values, so it will not change. Cool. So what I'm going to do is let's bring our other objects back. Let's just do that for now. And what we want to do is increase the size of our tube. So let's go to say 5. Let's do 6. And let's give it 100 columns, just because we lost a bit of resolution. And what I'm going to do is just translate it up a little bit. My snapping is still on. Just going to transform it up a little bit. And let's see. Let's bring the radius down to say 4. Cool. And you notice that there was 2 of them there. That was because I had this original tube selected, so it shows me it there. So if we just jump into our front view, we should have a nice little archway. Let's go. Let's go to about there. Now, If I uncheck and hit S, and we're going to select primitives, let's jump to our right view so that I can actually see it. And the ground plane is just there. So let's select those. And if I jump back to our perspective view, doesn't look like we got everything. Let's hide this. Side view. Why is it not getting this? Oh, well. Just holding down Shift and selecting more. This one. And then just hit delete. So now we have gotten rid of those. Cool. So now what we want to do is extrude this so that we get a nice wall. Let's hit S, and we are on faces. Let's select everything. Inside the viewport, just hit Tab, go Extrude. You'll see Poly Extrude. That's the one we want. And now I can just click this, and let's extrude out a wall. Cool. So it's currently going downwards, but that's fine because we aren't necessarily going to see it. We just want to use it as a wall, and depending on the camera, we don't need to be too precise with what the camera doesn't see. So let's jump back to objects, enable our backdrop. So now we have this, just this little sphere on this stand, this table here with a wall. And you'll notice, check, our wall, we don't actually have a back face over here. So I'm going to jump back into the tube. Where we go poly extrude, down at the bottom here it says output back. Just enable that. Now we have a wall. And for good measure, let's throw down a normals. Give it some normals. And I think for now we're good. We might want to bevel this edge a little later, but for simplicity's sake, let's just keep it like this. And now let's move our objects backwards, because they're going to be behind the wall. So if we just hit T, throw down a transform node, and move this back. Let's just go up to Ghost Other Objects. So now we can see our wall, and let's just move this back in Z. Something like that. Don't have to be too precise, because we're going to play around with it a bit later. And let's tighten up our backdrop a bit quick. Jump inside, go down to the poly bevel. Let's call this 1. I want it to be quite tight. And then I'm going to move it forward. So hit T again. Can actually do it up at the top here. So let's do this. It's actually affecting the scale. So sometimes I like to just break it up. One affects the scale, one affects the translate. You know, you can do translate and rotate at the same time, but usually I do like to break things up. So I'm just going to throw one down at the bottom here. And this will be our world control. Let's just bring it a little closer. And then just to have some other objects, and I'll show you this one quick because it's pretty easy. It's also nice and procedural. Let's create a new geometry node. Jump inside. Let's hide everything. Let's jump to our front view, so spacebar 3. And let's zoom in a bit here because it's quite big. Then click inside, hit Tab, right, type down curve. So now we have a curve, and Houdini does this weird thing sometimes where before you start a process, you need to hit enter. See, it says press enter here to complete. So Before clicking anything else, just hit enter. And now we will be able to, let's enable point snapping. And now we'll get a point here where we can start drawing. So I'm going to, let's say do a meter. So I'm going to hit at the origin. Let's go 1 across. Let's actually go 2 across. 3, 4. Let's go up here, and then let's come back. Anyway, something like that. Now, once I'm finished, just hit enter again, and it will create the curve for us. And then what we're going to do is, instead of polygons, we're going to change it to NURBS, which gives us a smooth curve. And you'll notice like we do get a bit of, say we want a tighter edge here. If we just hold down Shift and click on the curve, we should get another point. So now we can start dragging this around, and we can hit Shift and get another one there, and let's snap that, just so that we get a nice solid kind of base before it starts doing anything. Let's move these ones up, and I'm just clicking and dragging at this point. Let's just try to get a nice looking, that's not too bad, nice looking vase kind of shape. Cool, so we have this. If we jump into our perspective view, we'll see that we just have a curve here. I just hit spacebar F there. Again, to jump back, and then with this curve, what we're going to do is just hit Tab and type revolve. And what that does is basically just revolves the curve. So now we have a nice smooth little pot here. And what I'm going to do is just hit Tab, type down resample, and smooth this out. Actually, we don't need to because it's a NURBS. After the revolve, what I'm going to do is let's extrude it. Poly extrude, let's say 0.1. Ooh. Let's go -0.1. Did that just distort? Yeah. So let's go 0.1, so it goes up. 0.1, 0.02 rather, and then hit output back. And now we have a little vase here. So you'll notice from the revolve, because it's a NURBS curve, it's technically subdivided. So as soon as we hit poly extrude, this went from basically having like 1 primitive to 5,000 primitives. It essentially showed us the subdivision that it currently has. So now we have a pot. We might want to bevel this edge. So if we just hit S, and let's see, let's double click. So if I click a face, hit Shift and A, it will give me this ring selection. So I'm just going to check it there, and then let's see how far we can push this. So again, Shift and A, and from there it gives us how much range. Okay, let's click there. Keep holding down Shift and A, and we'll select this edge. Then let's just hit Tab, type bevel, and then let's say 0.001. Let's just go ignore flat edges so that it doesn't bevel each edge. Ignore shared edges. Cool. And let's actually give we'll leave it at that. Cool. So yeah, now we have this vase with a beveled edge. We can change it to round like our backdrop, and it will give us a smoother edge. Let's get in there. Okay, so you'll notice my clipping plane, it's not allowing me to get closer than this. To fix that, we can just hit D, and D gives us our display options. And if I go over to viewport, instead of near and far clipping plane, say neither clip plane, and then let's change this to 0.0001. That should be enough. Cool. So now if we zoom a little closer, we should be able to get in there. So let's just change that to 5, and you'll see we get a nice rounded edge. So another thing that you can do, where you click D, display options, if you want, you can go over to background and change the color scheme from light to dark to gray. We'll just keep it at light. I usually put it on the dark, especially when you're working with particles and stuff. It just makes it easier to see. So, but for now, we don't really need that. So here we have this vase, and what's cool is that if we want to change it, we can just come back up to our curve. Let's uncheck our snapping, and now we can procedurally change the shape of this. Well, not procedurally, but now we can change the shape of this with ease. So whatever we do to the curve essentially becomes the vase. Pretty cool. So let's hit T, throw down a transform, and wire that up. Then let's go back to our object level, and where's our wall? Cool. So now just to place this, let's call this vase, and I'm just going to jump in and scale it up quick. Let's call it 2. And then what I'm going to do is hit spacebar and 2 to go to the top. I'm just going to hit W to jump into wireframe mode so I can see a bit better. Here is the edge of our backdrop, here is our sphere and Platonic, and then I'm just going to move this vase somewhere over here. And then just for the sake of it, let's throw down another box. Let's jump inside. Let's copy the Y parameter. Let's paste relative references, divided by 2, and hit T to throw down a transform. And we are in the top view. Let's say ghost other objects, and then I'm just going to move this box, let's say right by the back here. Hit 1 to go into our perspective view. We are still in wireframe mode, but with this box selected, over here you'll see it's back at the origin because this is the one that I'm viewing. Let's just make a little obelisk or something like this. Let's just keep it simple, nothing crazy. Cool, so we have a tiny little scene here. We are going to just create a camera and some lights and just set up our scene quickly. Very quickly, I'll get into more detail about lights and rendering when we get to that, but for now, let's just create some lights so that we can see what is going on in our scene. Let's just go up to the top here, hit File, Save, and now we are going to create a camera and create some lights.